Welcome. Today I will talk you through my game against the Grandmaster Alexander Berelowitsch. The game was played in the Bundesliga, and my opponent is a very strong Grandmaster who was rated almost 2600 when the game took place. It took place during the match of my team back then, Kattenberg, against our travel partner Mülheim, and I consider this game to be among the best games of my chess career. But contrary to what you maybe hope for right now, the game is not as flashy. It's more of a strategical battle where I managed to grind down somebody who's very, very strong. So let me go straight into the action. I started with a move knight f3, as I mostly do, and I was prepared for the Tarrasch defense, which he played quite a bit at that point, but instead he went for a setup with d6 and bishop g4. I think both of us were pretty happy with that because it was just now a solid game where nobody fights for a huge opening advantage. Maybe white is a tiny bit better, but black is very solid. Particular in the line which I'm now choosing, so white has some more aggressive options here, like the move c4 or g3, but I choose to play a move which leads to just a quiet game where I don't have to know much theory. e3. And yeah, we play some normal developing moves. And yeah, this is the first position where I now start kicking away his bishop. So the white idea here is that I want to get the pair of bishops if possible. So if he takes on f3, I take back with the bishop. Maybe he goes, so maybe I can show that. So takes, maybe he goes c6 or something. And maybe, okay, this position is not much for white, but it's definitely a small advantage due to the pair of bishops. So therefore, he chose to play the move bishop h5 instead of taking on f3. And now I directly wanted to exploit this move with the move knight to h4. So knight h4 has the idea of playing against the weak square on f5, which is unprotected at this point. And so let me give you a sample line, for instance, takes, and now this knight f5 is looming. Probably objectively, this is still what I would have done as black, because you can still just, for instance, castle, maybe even allow a knight f5 and just go something like rook e8, and you have some development advantage in return for this somewhat strong knight on f5. Maybe in this position I even have to take on e7, and then I don't have the strong knight anymore anyhow. So therefore, after knight h4, I think he should just have taken on e2 and castled. But instead of doing that, he went for the move bishop g6, which surrenders the pair of bishops. And yeah, I'm a big fan of the pair of bishops, so I just took it. And I thought, okay, well, now I just have a small advantage, and I should not hurry. At the moment, he's a little bit better developed. He has this h file, which is half open. So I should just play slowly and make sure that I develop all my pieces. Queen c2, e3, just some solid moves. Yeah, and at this point, he did not yet want to let me know where he castles. So he wanted to keep the possibility maybe open to even stay with the king in the middle. So maybe go king f8 at some point. And therefore, he decided not to play short castles, but to just go rook c8 first and delay castling for a couple more moves. Takes, and bishop b2. And now that I don't have any threats anymore against the king side for the time being, he just castled. Well, this position now is definitely a little bit better for white because I have the pair of bishops. And so what is my strategic plan here? Well, my strategic plan is to exchange basically everything until I land in an endgame where I play with my two bishops against bishop and knight. And then to open up one of the wings and to make sure that my two bishops can maneuver freely to both sides, whereas this knight and bishop would be not as mobile. So yeah, therefore I played rook 81. And yeah, now he starts to put up some resistance. He plays the move a5. So right now he wants to get knight c5 in, and then he has a very solid and stable position of his knights as well. So therefore, I decided to play knight a4. And I think knight a4 is a pretty nice move, because for me it's nice to exchange one pair of knights. So in general, if you play with a pair of bishops, and you play against a bishop and a knight with an additional pair of knights, it's quite often a good idea to exchange one pair of knights. So the reason for that is that if you have the two bishops, the main advantage is that the two bishops can reach the squares of each color, and at the same time they are long-ranging pieces. While on the other hand, for the party which has the knights often protect each other, and so for black in this case, it should be desirable, I think, to keep the knights. Yet again, this is just strategic advice. It's not meant that this is true in every concrete position. And my opponent immediately now gives up his knight. But on the other hand, it's also not so easy for him to do something else. So I think his decision was actually fine to play knight c5. I exchanged. Yeah, and now I'm already in a position where I thought about a potential endgame with just the two bishops against bishop and knight, and thought this would be advantageous for me. But okay, so black is not in a hurry to offer the exchange of rooks here, and I need to find a plan which at least improves my position little by little. So now that's what I did, and yeah, so basically I asked myself which of the pieces are not really playing, and this is first this bishop on e2 and this rook on f1. But the rook on f1, I mean, at some point he might go rook d8 and then things exchange and this rook gets activated. So the piece which is really not playing is this bishop on e2. I went bishop f3, trying to bring this bishop on a better square, trying to fianchetto this bishop artificially, kind of. And yeah, that's what I did. Rook fe8, and I now played g3. Okay, so in this position, many players as black would go rook d8, but I think rook d8 is not the right plan. So if the rooks also come off the board, then I will end up in an endgame, maybe even if queens come off the board, which is just clearly better for white, because I have the two bishops and I have play on both flanks. So therefore, my opponent played a very strong move in this position, which is the move rook to a8. So he now wants to make sense of both of his rooks, and the best way of doing it is to put one on e8, maybe threatening e4 at some point, and the other one on a8, maybe threatening a4 at some point. So this also keeps me busy a little bit. Well, I played bishop g2, and he went a4. Again, a4 is the idea of exchanging a pair of pawns, which is better for the defending party in general. So I think he realized that he was slightly worse, but I don't think he was worried at that point. I went king h2, also improving my king a little bit. So sometimes h3 is loose, so that's a useful move. Takes, takes. And my opponent played the move bishop b4. Yeah, so the bishop on c5 didn't really do that much. Instead, he prefers to have the bishop on b4. On the one hand, this might avoid rook d2. This might also avoid a move like rook fe1 at some point, and it really restricts the play of my pieces. The other thing about bishop b4 is that it might also prevent a move like bishop c3, because now black could in principle exchange there. Well, now I thought, okay, so I don't see any obvious way of improving my pieces. So let's go to the next stage and do what I just already said a couple of times, try to exchange rooks and then maybe also queens. So I played rook a1. He took on a1, and went for knight d7. So it seems that this position is quite nice for me because I have the pair of bishops and I have the open A file. But now it's difficult to make progress. So I was thinking in this position for quite some time and I didn't see any obvious way of making progress as white. So playing something like f4, yeah, this is not really yet the right time to do this because his rook is perfectly placed for that, and my e file becomes too weak. I also don't have anything to attack on the a file, so if I go rook a7, he can just kick me back, and therefore it's not so easy for me to come up with a plan. One logical plan is to somehow kick his bishop away and then go b4 and maybe c5, b5. But he will not just go away. So if I go rook a4, he will probably just go queen b6. So therefore, after a long think, I took a decision which I like a lot and which illustrates that you should not be too dogmatic when it comes to chess. And it's basically to give up the pair of bishops right now. So I played the move bishop c3. So why did I do that? Well, somebody smart said once, one advantage of the pair of bishops is that you can decide when you want to give it up. And this is indeed such a case. So here, black's pieces are pretty passive. So all of these three pieces are kind of looking against this pawn. And my bishop is pretty strong. I might go b4, b5, or b4, c5, b5. And the only piece which annoys me in that sense is the bishop on b4. Therefore, I played the move bishop c3, giving up this bishop. He played queen b6, and I insisted on exchanging the bishop. He cannot not go back in a decent way because the knight on d7 is hanging, so he had to take. And yeah, now we reach a position where white has a lot of strategic threats. So basically my main idea is to go b4, c5, or c5, b4, depending on what he does. And then to maybe go rook a7, b5, and so on. So he has now two pretty concrete options. So now the structure of the game changes again in the sense that it becomes more concrete. He could go e4, which is definitely a decent option to try to weaken this bishop on g2. Let me just give you a sample line. c5, e4, yeah, just what I said. And now just bishop f1. And yeah, bishop c4 is going to come. White is still slightly better. And yeah, I guess it's a position which is just much more enjoyable to play with the white pieces. So my opponent didn't want to do that. And instead he went for knight c5. So he went for something more concrete. And this now gave me the option of going b4. So finally getting this b4 push. And now playing against this knight on a6 with the move rook b1. So again, the strategic plan has changed. My new target is this knight on a6, which is really out of play. So as I said, I might at any point threaten to go b5 or c5, b5, and therefore he just shut down the diagonal right now with the move e4. I think it's another pretty decent move from him. And now I started to go for a concrete line with the moves c5 followed by b5. He took, and still you can see the problems that this knight brings to the black position. So right now he went for queen d5. And one more concrete alternative was the move queen d3. In this case, I could take and take on b7, so this would have sacrificed this pawn. And after d2, I could go back to f3. And yeah, he could now try to win back this pawn on c5. But for instance, in some line like this one, I would eventually win the pawn on d2, and then we would be left with an endgame with the bishop n4 against knight n3, and probably this would give pretty decent drawing chances. So maybe this would have been a line that black could have gone for, would have been better than the game, but of course pretty unpleasant to go there. Instead, as I said, he played the move queen b5, protecting the pawn on b7, and now I went for queen d4. Again, knowing when to change pieces here is crucial, and this is again transforming my advantage. So right now, I'm no longer playing against this weak pawn on b7, because this is going to be exchanged. But instead, I now play just against this very bad knight on a6. He went for queen b6, queen c6, rook b6, takes, and rook b7. And at first glance, you might say, well, all of this just to end up with an endgame with 4 against 4 on one wing. Well, but it's not so easy. So in particular, this knight is a really, really bad piece. And yeah, he now exchanged. I mean, e4 is also potentially hanging at some point. Queen d7 is a threat. So I think he pretty much has to exchange. And now he went for knight b8, transforming into a rook endgame where he's just a pawn down. But this is also a necessity. So let's say black goes for king f8. Then the problems with this knight become too severe. Let's just say bishop f1. The knight has no more squares, so the rook has to defend the knight. And all of black's pieces are extremely passive. And right now it's just collecting the pawns. And for instance, after bishop b5, takes, I will also take on e4 on the next move, and white is winning. So therefore, his move knight b8 is kind of the only move here. And we land in an endgame where I'm just a pawn up. Well, this endgame is of course not an easy win, but it's always nice if you reach an endgame where you know 100% that you cannot lose. He went for g5, so he doesn't want to give me a structure where his king stays on h7, and therefore it makes a lot of sense to go g5 in that position. I bring my king, and he goes rook e1. Ideally, right now, I would like to have my rook behind my pawn. It's not so easy to get that. So the first thing I did here was to go rook d6 check, trying to see if he wants to play f6, because f6 might also weaken the pawn on g7 a little bit. But he cannot go king f5, because then it's just g4 mate. So basically, either he has to go back to h7, which he doesn't want, or he has to weaken the structure a little bit with f6. And now, after this weakening, I just went back to d8. And in this position, he probably made a last mistake. So I think he should have gone for the move rook h1, which would force me to go back. And we would land in that endgame where white is still a lot better, but I'm not sure if this is winning or not. And I'm not the kind of person to analyze these endgames until I'm absolutely sure. So after rook d8, he instead went for king f5, rook d7, again attacking g7. He doesn't want to weaken the structure even more, and he goes king g6. And now this allows me to swing my rook with rook a7 and bring my king to the center. Now he has two options basically. One is to attack the pawn from behind, and the other one is to go back to, let's say, e8. And that's what he did in the game. So let's see what happens if he goes rook d1. Well, now I can start running. So some line like this, king c4, and the king runs, and d5, and my pawns are my d pawn is just too quick. So king e7 and the d pawn runs. Well, therefore he went for the move rook to e8, trying to get to maybe d8 at some point, but also not allowing my king to cross the e-file. I played rook a3 with the idea of maybe at the right point in time to bring my rook behind the pawn on d4. Rook h8 attacking h3 pawn, but right now it's the time to transform my advantage one more time. So now I'm a pawn up, and I transform the advantage now, instead of being a pawn up, to having this extremely dangerous passed pawn, which is going to decide the game. d5, rook a2, and now king d4, and I run in with the king and the pawn. Here he cannot go king e6 because of rook e2 check followed by rook e7 check, and now that he tries to run and try to get my pawns, I set another very nice blockade with this pawn to not give him any counterplay, because in this way I prevent king f3. Now I have f3 check, further slowing down his advances, and I can just go king c6, f4, and now you can see that I will forever keep this pawn on g3, and I will just run with my pawn and get a queen in exchange for his rook on d2, and the game is over. So he still played a couple of more moves. c2, rook c3 now, with the idea of playing king c7 followed by d7, d8, so shielding my king from rook checks on the c-file. Takes, and king e7 is what I did now, because I had this very concrete idea that in this position I have king e6, and he cannot go to f3 with the king, because I can just go rook d5. So after rook d3, d7, king f3, rook d5, my opponent resigned. Well, I like this game so much because it had so many transformations of advantage. So I started off basically out of the opening with this pair of bishops. I then basically planned on building the whole game around that. But then, due to his nice blockade with the bishop on b4, I was forced to find another way of advancing. I exchanged this bishop against his bishop to be able to advance my pawns on the queen side. Then, instead of getting this strong initiative against his pawn on b7, I exchanged this for a very bad knight that he had on a6. Then I once more transformed it to have to be a pawn up in this rook endgame. And then in the end, I gave back the pawn and transformed it to a d pawn, which just ran to the queen. Well, I hope that you enjoyed this game and the analysis of this game, and that you tune in next time. Thanks a lot for watching.
When you have stress, play chess. When you fall on your ass, play chess for a real deal, for Christian seal.